Welcome back to another episode of Down There with Liz. I'm your host, Liz from Lioness, and today we're talking about something a little bit different than usual. I sit down with Frances from Awkward Essentials and Melanie from Lorals, and we talk about inventing new products and building a company in the sex tech space. Because there's always something kind of interesting about how companies are made, how new products are made. So I think this conversation should be pretty fun, and I'm looking forward to sharing it with all of you. Enjoy the episode. So, hello.
Hello. Hey.
So I'm here with Melanie and with Frances, and we're going to talk about, our products, and then also some fun, what I call sort of war stories developing our products that I think should be a lot of fun for people. So I guess first let's just do a quick introduction. So I'll introduce myself before, so whatever, you know me. Who are both of you?
Oh, hi, I'm Melanie Cristol, founder and CEO of Lorals. At Lorals, we make silky latex undies for comfort, pleasure, and STI protection during oral sex. Therefore, when you want all of the sensations of oral, but something is holding you back from truly enjoying the experience, so you're just really able to slip them on and have all the fun that you want.
And also, now you can say it's for STI protection, as of a few months ago, I think.
As of a couple months ago, we are now FDA-cleared. We're a medical device.
Yay!
Yes.
Yay! Yes.
Hi everyone, I'm Frances. I'm the founder of Awkward Essentials. We make products for behind the bathroom door problems, and our first product is Dripstick. It's an after-sex cleanup sponge that's meant to absorb all the excess fluids internally after sex, so there's no dripping, leaking, wet sheets, soggy underwear, or anything like that.
Awesome. So the first question that I know I get sometimes with making a smart vibrator is how do you end up making a product that you're making? Because everything that we're making here is kind of different or atypical than what you would normally see in, at least right now at Target or, at different convenience stores. So what made you decide I want to make this specific product?
For me, I guess I would say my Lorals journey started when I was a peer sex educator during college, and I would teach about a product called a dental dam, which is a latex sheet that is, prior to Lorals, the only FDA-cleared STI protection product that existed for cunnilingus. And so when you use the product, somebody has to hold it with two hands. Either if you're the receiver and you're holding it, then you hold it in front of your body, or if you're the giver, somehow you have to be able to prop yourself up to perform oral sex, but then also hold this dental dam in place. And so I remember when I was teaching about the product, people would laugh and say, seriously, you really want me to use this? I have to hold it the whole time, and it's called a dental dam? What? And, I understood where people were coming from, because while it was good that a product existed to protect against STIs during oral, it really didn't solve people's problems. It didn't feel like something that people wanted to use. And if you don't want to use it, then you're not going to be protected against those STIs. So basically, I found myself using dental dams here and there and, feeling that it was good that they existed, but, I didn't want to have to hold it in place. I didn't like that when I was a giver, it basically goes up inside your nostrils and inside of your mouth because of its looseness. And I didn't like when I was a receiver that the product sort of folded up on top of itself, again, because of its looseness. And then there's several layers between your partner's mouth and your body. And so you're really not able to feel a lot of sensation. And then we also found that we would, somebody would accidentally drop the dental dam or would actually accidentally turn over, and then you're passing the STIs that you're concerned about preventing the transmission of in the first place. So basically, over time, I realized it really would be great if this product was fun to use and attractive and stayed in place, and you didn't have to hold it, and was only one layer of material rather than multiple. And so eventually, while I was working as a lawyer, I had the idea to basically create attractive undies for oral sex that incorporated a dental dam into them, but looked just like regular lingerie that you would buy at Victoria's Secret or somewhere else. And so that was kind of the idea that I had. I spent about 8 months wondering whether I was going to leave my law job to actually create Lorals. And eventually I decided to quit my job and start the company. And then Lorals has happened from there.
Awesome.
Yeah.
How many people actually use dental dams?
So about 5 to 10 million dental dams are sold for oral sex per year, but like that's such a crazy small number, right? Because like 80 million people in the United States have STIs, and the majority of STIs can be transmitted via oral sex. And actually, I recently learned that 85% of genital herpes cases are actually transmitted via oral sex. Like,
that makes
crazy,
sense.
right? And so many of these STIs that people have are transmissible via oral, yet only 5 to 10 million people are using dental dams, or 5 to 10 million dental dams are used. And so it's just really an underutilized product and a huge potential market if you can come up with a product that people actually want to use and that doesn't detract from their intimate experience.
Yeah, where are dental dams sold now?
So you can buy them on Amazon. You can buy them sometimes in sex toy stores, but dental dam companies have had a lot of trouble getting the products into pharmacies and to big box stores because there just isn't really the demand. And actually, when Lorals came to market, we started getting inquiries from pharmacies, and they were saying, people are asking, like, is there something other than a dental dam to use for STI protection during oral sex? So it's definitely part of our plan to eventually be in pharmacies and in big box stores because people are so much more willing and excited to use Lorals than they have been to use dental dams. It's really solving a problem that hadn't really been solved for 40 years because I mean, if you think about it, like when condoms came out, they were bowl-shaped and you had to like hold them in place with 2 hands while you were thrusting. Like nobody's going to use that product, Like it's a really big ask. And I kind of find it like insulting a little bit to women that we've been asked for so long to hold this product in place in order to protect ourselves. Like we deserve something that's made with our bodies in mind and that doesn't require 2 hands to hold it.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. That makes a lot of sense.
That's so crazy. What a pain. I've never thought about dental dams in depth like that before, but it's interesting. So Dripstick is our core product, and I created it because it was also a personal problem that I had. So I have a husband, I have a kid, and the way my body worked after sex, I just didn't like that dripping. Like it would stay in my body, and then the next day I would like be at work and then I'd feel like this gushing feeling, and I wouldn't know if it was like my period or my husband's cum, and it just was super uncomfortable. And so I would Google it all the time, and I was be sent to like Reddit threads and like Yahoo Answers, which no longer exists, which is not a credible location to look for answers,
but very fun.
But very fun. And everyone is like, oh, just use like a towel or baby wipes or like an old t-shirt. And it's like, okay, that's fine for the outside, but for me, like his cum is inside, and I would love to just like get it out in one fell swoop. And so what happened is, as I got older, I got to the point where every time after sex, I would jump in the shower and stick my finger up there and kind of like try to like scoop it out, because I just didn't want to deal with it. I was like, if I can get it out, then I don't have to deal with it. I can move on with my day. But it wasn't a very effective way to do things. And so I love to bake. And whenever you bake a cake, you use a rubber spatula to scrape cake batter out of a bowl. Cake batter is very thick. And so every time I make a cake, I'd be like, oh, it'd be so great if I had a spatula for my vagina that I could just like get everything out in like one scoop. And so that was the inspiration for the product. It took a while for it to come to fruition. It is not a spatula, but it's a medical grade sponge that has a handle and absorbs everything internally. And it's meant for more viscous fluids as opposed to like a tampon.
Yeah, I was going to ask like what would happen if you tried using a tampon to scoop out cum?
I have tried using a tampon.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking. I figured.
In the early days, and it turns into this like slimy like bullet thing. It kind of like slides out because it just can't absorb something as
That
thick as
totally
cum.
makes sense.
Yeah, like slimy bullet is honestly the best adjective I can think of because that's how it
that's how it is sometimes, like during a period, right? Like
if it's like if
the
blood is,
excess
like, super
has
thick,
the sliminess, but if it's all slime, then there's nothing like absorbent about the tampon. That's so interesting.
And I don't know the like safety of that either, because tampons are meant for like an extended period of time and like a lot of fluid, whereas I think the average amount of semen is like 2 teaspoons. It's not that much, and so if you like left that in your body, I don't know. So so the whole point of it being a sponge is like it's porous, there's bigger pores, it can catch and absorb something that's thicker and slimier
in less time too.
That's so cool.
Yeah, so like a couple seconds, you spin it and then you're good.
How did you realize it was going to be a sponge?
So I guess this is part of the prototyping stuff. As someone that did not have a lot of capital to do research on this, I thought about what was safe and already existed in the market that was made out of the same material. So the material is the same as a contraceptive sponge, except there's no additives, and the same as non-latex condoms. So I was like, okay, that material is clearly safe for the vaginal canal. And then after trying the slimy bullet tampon, I'm like, okay, it has to be able to absorb something of a thicker viscosity. So a sponge has bigger pores. And that was kind of what led me down that path. But it was really jumping off of like other companies' time and research and things that exist to come to those conclusions.
Great artist steal though. So
yeah,
I mean, it's nothing's ever like 100% original. You start with like some pieces and things that are already made and then kind of build up from there into something that's original.
Yeah, because starting from scratch would be like crazy, right? Or even like if dental dams didn't exist, you would have had to.
Oh my God, it would have been so hard. Like the FDA clearance process. We couldn't have done the FDA clearance process, which is like a modified process. The FDA approval process is a huge, incredibly expensive process that exists basically for brand new drugs and devices that are coming to market. And so like if you don't have like a predicate device in place, gosh, how hard it must be to come up with something.
I'm actually surprised that dental dams had any sort of dental dams for like oral sex use specifically had any sort of like FDA background or like any sort of predicate to it, I guess.
Yeah. So the lore is that in the 1980s, a group of lesbians were at a conference. It was either like a sex toy conference or like a condom conference or something. But they went up to a couple of condom company owners and said, "We really would like for there to be a product for us to use during cunnilingus for STI protection." And there was one condom company owner at that conference. And so the owner got the idea and thought, okay, like I'll make some kind of product for oral sex. Then around the same time, possibly like even simultaneously, which is a little curious, another condom company owner was at a dentist's office getting some surgery done on his tooth, and there was an actual dental dam being used by his dentist. And he thought, if I made this a little bit taller and maybe a little bit thinner, it could actually be used for cunnilingus. And so both of these condom company owners had these ideas at relatively similar times. And in order to get their product through the FDA clearance process, they actually used a condom as a predicate device.
Okay.
And basically said, a cut up condom is roughly, 6 inches in width times 8 inches in height. And, it's roughly this thickness. And they were basically tested against each other to ensure that a flattened version of a condom basically, was what had the similar safety and efficacy as a condom, but for oral vaginal sex. Then over time, they actually added oral anal sex as an indication for use to oral dams. So when Lorals came about, we already had, a few dental dams, also known as oral dams, that had been cleared for not only oral vaginal sex, but also oral anal sex. So then we were basically able to utilize those devices as our predicate devices. But yeah, I think that there are now maybe 6 oral dams in the MSC category.
What's MSC?
It like for condom, it's like CDM, but MSC like it should just be damn, right?
Yeah.
But basically, it's like a 3-letter categorization
Mouse
within
sex condom.
Oh my God, what if it's that? I've
can
always
look it up.
kind of that would be no, that's so interesting. What if it is that? I just kind of always thought, oh, oral dam is miscellaneous, like I have no idea if it'll actually say it, but yeah, MSC is the category.
I'm curious. I'll look it up later.
What if it's a mouth sex condom?
I mean, that makes sense from the story.
It totally makes sense. Like, the word mouth sex condom was not in either of the, FDA 510K summaries for these first... It's so weird.
It's a terrible name.
Yeah, I was like, oh, okay, I guess we're just miscellaneous, but what if it's mouth sex condom? That's so smart. I love it.
Miscellaneous.
No, mouth sex condom makes... I'm just going to say it's mouth sex condom from now on.
Yeah, miscellaneous would be too broad for the FDA.
Yeah.
It'd be
well, it's within a subcategory of, contraceptives, I believe.
Okay, that might be miscellaneous.
Miscellaneous condom.
Yeah. I kind of thought it was more along the lines of miscellaneous condom, but I'm just going to call it a mouth sex condom.
FDA is going to be like, we don't appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yeah, whenever they stumble across this podcast, it's like, I need to write an email to Melanie.
They've been very nice to us. Yeah, they commented, the New York Times wrote an article when Lorals received FDA clearance to kind of announce that the clearance had happened. And the FDA commented in the article and said, very what am I trying to say? The FDA said official but nice things that made me feel good. It was like, oh yay, the FDA is saying something.
That's cool.
It was pretty cool.
It's so it's legitimizing.
Yeah, it really does. Yeah. Yeah. It felt very cool.
Yeah. So okay, let's go from we have this point for where you got all this legitimacy in terms of now you have this product that has FDA clearance. But let's steer for both of you, let's steer back to the very early days of prototyping and being at the factory, or just some of those early sort of interesting stumbling blocks that we've all had, especially because we're prototyping something that is related to genitals and vaginas and vulvas in some way. So yeah, talk about what are some fun things that you encountered along the way.
So I would say one thing that was fun was my very first prototyping. I can send you a picture of this. But basically, I thought that the product was probably going to be dip molded, which is the way that condoms and gloves are made. And so basically you take a mold and then it's a simple process, but also very specialized. And there's only a few factories in the United States that even do it anymore. Most of it happens overseas. But basically, you dip a mandrel into warm latex, and then the mandrel comes up and the product congeals on it. But anyway, so I was like, okay, it's going to be made out of liquid latex that then congeals. So why don't I just buy some liquid latex and paint it onto a mannequin and just see what happens, to kind of understand a little bit more about the process. And then I also wanted to test whether basically the mannequin, or, which would eventually be the mandrel, whether it would be useful for it to be anatomically correct in some way. Mm-hmm. So I basically created a vulva out of clay and then added it on top of the mannequin and then painted liquid latex around the mannequin, let it dry, and then pulled it off. And it looked so awful. It just absolutely looked terrible, but it was yay, I have a prototype, you know?
Have to start somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And the anatomical correctness, I kind of realized then, okay, this is not very useful. But it was still kind of funny. I had a mannequin sitting around my apartment for a long time that had a vulva on it. It was pretty cool. Yeah. That's one.
Yeah.
I mean, I was doing something. I was like cutting up sponges in my kitchen, like just trying to figure out like, okay, I was looking at pre-existing things, kind of like we were saying. So like the length and the thickness of tampons, because presumably tampon companies have put a lot of time and research into like the average length and width of like a vaginal canal, and so just like doing things like I was ordering all kinds of like random like medical swabs and supplies and like just like sponges to try to figure out what would work best and like putting them on handles and stuff. It was very hacked together.
Yeah.
Similar.
How do you?
I was also, this is kind of related. So I would also like basically buy sheet latex and then cut it into different shapes. And what I realized is like, although that actually seems slightly easier when you're kind of hacking it together, what ended up happening was when you create the seams, basically by using latex glue, everything kind of crumbles up, and it has to be done incredibly precisely in order to look good. And then it doesn't actually look that good because you see this like kind of crumbly seam on the side. Huh. And so that is actually what led me to realize like dipping is going to make much more sense so that it's seamless and so that it doesn't take this, hand done step of doing the glue and then making sure that it's perfectly flat and all of those kinds of things. But I'm sorry, I didn't.
Oh, yeah, no worries. Yeah, no, I wanted to ask about the handles for dripstick.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I remember this is a little more recent, but at some point you changed the handles in some way. And I'm like, what sort of, there has to be like several like months at least of like research and feedback and thought process into like changing a handle. Like, I know we get that. We had like, months of conversations about like buttons and like the push press button and the nature of that for like Lioness.
Wow.
And I think like people don't really know like what that is, what goes into that, So yeah, if you could speak a little bit about that.
Yeah. So the reason why the product has a handle in the first place is so you don't leave it in your body. So it's kind of like this UX UI thing where we're like, okay, if it has a handle, you can't put your pants back on, so it should signal to the user that it's not meant to stay inside. So
that's smart.
Yeah, it's like from like, so it's kind of like from I don't know what you would call that, like a psychological usage, like when it suggests a certain use case, and then also to like have a handle to insert the sponge. And so it evolved because your hands are like slippery and there's like lube and like all kinds of stuff all over you. And so that's why we changed the handle to have like a flat tab so that you could better grip it and even like twist it if you needed to twist it while it was in your body. But really it was to use as a handle and as like a use case signal. Don't leave it in.
Yeah, you can't just like put your pants on and go about your day.
Yeah.
That totally makes sense. Yeah, I wanted to share some of my prototype stories too.
Yes.
Like, so, okay, actually we were talking about this before and I thought of some additional ones.
Okay.
So like one of our very first prototypes, and I'll try to find a picture of it. It's so bad. Basically, I got a pre-existing vibrator, like like an insertable vibrator, and we stuck sensors on the vibrator and like wrapped it with electrical tape, put a condom over it. And then, like, I tried it.
That's awesome. Oh my God.
Because, like, it has for people who are not familiar, so Lioness, it's a smart vibrator, has biofeedback sensors, so you can visualize arousal and orgasm. So a portion of it is force sensors. So that was, like, one of the sensors the most important one for us, that I wanted to make sure, like, okay, this is picking up the data that I'm expecting. So yeah, it was like really scary looking because you have these like wires like sticking out and you can, like I would not give this to someone to like test because like, I'm like, this is too risky, but we're making this, I'm whatever, I'm putting in my own body. I'm fine with it. If I do something, if something stupid happens, like I'm going to sue myself. Like it's, whatever, I was fine with it as like a first conceptual prototype. And yeah, afterwards, we did a lot of like, I spent an entire summer in like a literal like basement, like no sun, windows, anything, like figuring out how to do like mold making and cast, or like for casting. And like, it's not like I have a sculpture background, so I kind of knew how to do some of the like mold making and casting, like how to do it in the first place. And I did a lot of like casting boobs and vulvas and things in the past. So
that's awesome.
If you need help with that, I'm
you're the professional.
Well, it's been a few years, but
that's so awesome. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So like I was like, oh, I can do something similar. It's a little bit different because, you need like a cavity inside and it needs to have a specific sort of geometry because there's sensors and, you have this plastic casing and things. But I spent an entire summer like trying to figure out how to make it in a way where like the skin was so like thin enough that any sort of like little movement of the mold could just like ruin the entire thing. And I was making this for other people to test because I'm not going to like put electrical tape and condom and just give that to people. So there were several times where I'm just like at a table in a basement by myself, like, oh my God.
That's so cool that you were able to do that though.
Like, it was a dark time.
Literally. A dark time.
Yeah.
I thought it was fun. I mean, I was painting onto mannequins, so like
it is, but it's like it's crazy to think how far it is from like your current product, especially like that's wild.
Yeah, this is before Anna too came into the. She was like starting to work on it, but a bit before she came into the picture, and like she probably would have done much better than me, but. Yeah, at the time, like just trying to figure things out and just make a working initial sort of prototype, like that was painful. And then, I have a third one, but I can save it for another time since this is about YouTube also.
For me, the stage that probably was the hardest was going from those like silly prototypes to actually figuring out how to manufacture this at scale. It was a really hard time because my factory, I prototyped with about 4 different factories, first one in the US. And they spent several months kind of developing their prototype. And then what they were able to come up with in a few months, I mean, it was way too thick. It had a kind of a chalky texture. It smelled bad, and I was just pretty discouraged that after months of prototyping, that was all that we had been able to, figure out. And then also the pricing that they gave me just, they had thought that they would be able to give me pricing that would, make sense as a consumer products company. But in the end, the pricing that they were able to give me is basically what I would have to sell the product for, not directly to consumers, but at wholesale. And that's just not workable. Right. So that was a really hard time. And I started going to medical device conferences and trying to figure out where else I could look. And what I learned was that Malaysia was the go-to place for quality condom manufacturing. And so I thought, okay, I think I need to go to Malaysia. So I started reaching out to Malaysian factories and said that I was going to be in town and are you willing to meet with me? And I probably met with about 7 or 8 factories several years ago when I went out to Malaysia for the first time. 3 of them were very interested and wanted to prototype. So those 3 factories I started working with, once I came back to the United States, and we were, talking on WhatsApp and doing, video calls and everything. And they put together prototypes and then sent them to me. One entity dropped off during that process, but then the 2 that were prototyping, one of them just did an outstanding job. And so it was okay. It was like, okay, here's who I'm going to work with. Sorry, that's my Tourette's. But anyway, so the factory that I now am working with and was working with at that time was working very closely with a consultant who was the owner of the machinery that they were using to make our product. And so I worked with the factory and with this consultant for a year doing prototypes. And, the first ones were were okay. They were so much better than the other factories, but like, you know, definitely not workable. And we finally got to the point that this product was workable. It was actually looking pretty good. And then the next time I went to the factory, the consultant pulled me to the side and said, I don't want to work with this factory anymore. Come and work with me. And if you don't, I'm going to take the machine from the factory. And so, you know, I didn't appreciate being bullied. And, you know, the factory was the one that had, you know, they had an existing relationship with the FDA. They were an ISO certified factory. Like they made billions of condoms that they've sold to, you know, 5 continents. They were the ones I wanted to work with, not with the consultant. So we could not convince him to let us buy the machine, and he left. He still tried to reach out to me for months afterwards, trying to convince me to go and work with him instead. And we just had to start from scratch again and develop our own machinery. But like,
oh my God,
so much craziness. And like, it's crazy to look back on that, because that was, I mean, it was just 4 years ago, and somehow we were able to pull it all together and to launch the product and get to where we are right now. I'm sorry if that story went on really long.
That's a crazy story.
Yeah, actually, like I haven't thought about it in a while, but it was so hard.
Yeah, like I think, people don't, unless like you've created something and brought it to like or tried to bring it to market before, like you don't realize like some of the like crazy stuff that goes in the background.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, the fact that you need specialized machinery to make the product, like ultimately it's good. And we ended up creating totally different machinery than what he had made. So like ultimately it's good, because like now we have intellectual property, and we like actually now have patents on our method of manufacturing and our mold for manufacturing and our product itself, but then, you know, trade secrets as well. So it is hard to figure out how to make the product, and it's, you know, that's kind of a good thing for a young company, but like it also leads to these kinds of major problems early on. And it can be really, really hard when you're a tiny business trying to overcome that kind of crap.
Yeah, totally. Have you had...
Not that crazy, because I went to a bunch of medical conferences too. And so I was reaching out to like medical manufacturers to try to get this done. And honestly, I just like drew it on a piece of paper, and I was like, this is kind of the measurements I want. This is what I'm looking for. And like gave that to the factories to see who could do it. I think the scariest hurdle for me was the MOQ. So I had to order 25,000 in the first run to get it done. And I was just like resisting. I was like, what am I going to do? Like, what if it doesn't work? Right. And so, the person that actually got me to get over that fear and I ended up ordering 20 was actually my dad. Cause he was like, you know, are you just going to like keep planning for the rest of your life, or are you going to like actually take the next step? And so that next step was to have it in hand, because before I had it in hand, people didn't understand what I was talking about. And so I guess that's kind of like the pre-hurdle before having like a nice prototype. Like a lot of business accelerators and like conventional advice would say to explain your idea and like get pre-sales, or like try to make sure that there's interest. And so at least for my product, maybe yours too, I don't know, but people just like, because it didn't exist, they couldn't imagine it. They assumed that it was like a wipe or like a suction machine or like a booger bulb, or like just completely not what it was. No matter how many times I would say like sponge or swab or absorb or after or insert, like it didn't like click. I couldn't get the message through. And so I really strongly felt like if it had in hand and people saw it, they would understand what it is and how it worked. But that would mean ordering 25,000. So I had 25,000, and they sat in my parents' house like every good founder.
So I wish I could use my parents' house as a distribution center.
Yes, my parents, I took over one room, the living room and the dining room, and that was my distribution center for a long time.
Your parents were
Mom, Dad, are you hearing this? You're slacking.
Yeah, actually, this is something that, like as we're talking about this, like, what was it like to like talk about like your product? Like did he have like the shitty prototype phase where like you had like, okay, you have this like kind of, here's kind of roughly how it works, and then you show an accelerator, an investor, or different people and like see their reactions. Like, we tried that and
I mean, mine is so shitty that I feel like it did like for the users, it did kind of like click a little bit, but our product is really simple. And so I think it also, the simplicity, made it more difficult. Like it made the shittier prototype look shittier because it's so simple, if that makes sense. But once we had like the MVP, then it very much clicked for people. But yeah, I mean, I had this like hacked together blue sponge thing on a stick at one point.
How did people react to it?
You know, one of my friends actually was willing to use it, which was very brave of her. Thank you, Emily. But I didn't show it to that many people. I ended up just like ordering that 25,000. I had more conviction than you probably should. But with a product that doesn't exist, I don't know how else you're supposed to like do it.
A lot of awkward conversations. Like we did the 3D printed like mold casted. Yeah. So like at one point, like I remember I finally had one that like looked reasonable. Like there wasn't any like cuts or you know, like holes in the silicone or, you know, things like it was just like properly like a prototype. Still looked ugly, but it looked better than the like wires and, you know, what am I supposed to do with this prototype? And I'm part of this like hardware accelerator at UC Berkeley, where there were like meetings like every week where people were like talking about developments and, you know, what they're doing and stuff, and brought this prototype in. It's mostly all guys at this. It's a hardware accelerator, mostly all guys, like engineering, you know, that sort of thing. Like I passed it around. I was like, no one's used it. This is like a, you know, clean prototype. Like, you know, want to show people like, you know, what we've been doing. And like the way that people kind of like hold it and like kind of like, they're like, huh. Like it's kind of like looking at this like sort of sculptural piece of like, you know, like this is interesting. That was like probably a more generous like
I was gonna say that's
reaction.
Nice.
Yeah.
That sounds like a really nice reaction. I felt like I was going to events and showing men and like laughed out of the room.
Well, granted, we had been like spending a few months like talking about stuff, so like they you know, it wasn't like a surprise of like, oh, you know, they got past the like, oh, it's this weird girl making vibrators or whatever. But yeah, like with the investors, I'm trying to remember with investors, it's sort of, I think it's just, yeah, it's harder when you don't have like the real thing or like here's what it's going to be on the store shelf, because well, one, it doesn't have the same sort of polish, but then two, if it's something where you're like inserting it into like a vagina, then there's just all these like hurdles of like, wait, this is, you know, like there's a lot of like filling in to put in, where like if you're talking to investors who are like mostly like guys and middle age, and you know, there may or I mean, there's no, until recently there haven't been like any sort of like investors that focus on sex tech or femtech, then they're just like, what the hell am I looking at? who are these people? Like I probably invited them in because I wanted to be entertained this afternoon, you know, rather than like take it seriously.
I feel like I actually haven't had that many investor type meetings that are in person and where they're actually seeing and touching the product. I've had a lot of conversations with folks where they're, you know, seeing like a presentation and they're able to see pictures of what it looks like when people are wearing Lorals. But I mean, honestly, now that I think about it, I really should try to have more in-person meetings, because when people like, usually the impression that people get when they look at Lorals and they touch it, like they're really shocked by how soft it is, how lightweight, how stretchy. Like basically I'll put my like hands in the sides and show like you can stretch basically the full length of somebody's body. And the stretch is good both because it allows the product to be one size fits US sizes 0 through 20. But then also the stretch is good because it allows for tongue and finger penetration. So the stretchiness is important. And then also like, you know, the product smells and tastes good. And that's kind of unexpected because people think latex and they think, kind of smelly, a rubber odor. But yeah, I think the first time that I actually was at an event and I pulled out Lorals and was showing them to people, it was at the New York City Sex Expo. I want to say in like 2019. And it was great because we had this little tray out and people could come and touch Lorals and play with them. And it was just like overwhelmingly such a positive reaction. So yeah, I think the touching and playing with the product has been overall like a win for us.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That makes
Yours
sense
is not
too.
as fun to play
Yeah, it's
with.
not as fun. It's like, it's very utilitarian
Mm-hmm.
versus a lot of like pleasure products.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like a completely different angle, to be honest.
Yeah, it is a totally different angle.
I feel like, I don't know, there could be some interesting, I don't know. Okay. I don't know. I'm saying too many things in my head. I'm like, it could be an interesting like art sort of installation of like, or something.
Well, so actually, Lorals
yeah.
was at Art Basel, and we kind of like wanted it to be a cool sensory experience. So we had models who were wearing Lorals, and they were kind of wearing them under these gauzy dresses, and the product looked awesome. It looked like they were wearing fashionable undies that happened to like be a little bit like. Sorry, another tick. So like they were, skin tight, but and we had some people wearing them on the matte side, and then some people wearing them on the shiny side, because Lorals are reversible and they have these two different looks to them. And then we also attached Lorals to pieces of fruit, and basically created holes inside of the fruit. And the idea was that people could come and touch the fruit through the Lorals and like kind of go inside the hole, like finger the little hole. And what was so cool about it is you could feel entirely the texture of the insides of these different kinds of fruits. So like when you were feeling an orange, you could feel like all of its like internal stuff. And then you could feel like the inside of a banana and the inside of an apple, and like everything felt really different texture wise. And so it really drove home the point that like when you're wearing Lorals, you can feel everything through them. But it was also like, it was artsy, like legitimately it was fun, tactile, kind of performative art. And so it was really cool to do that at Art Basel.
Yeah, like I was thinking like you could make like a cake maybe with dripsticks, or
the way we demonstrate the product is with a Twinkie. Yeah. So we use food also. Yeah. So in the early days, people were like, I don't understand, like, how does it work? I don't get it. And so I did look up an anatomical, like, vaginal canal, like a clear one on Amazon. They're so expensive.
How much are they?
It was way out of my budget at that time, and probably still out of my budget, because I was like, oh, I'll do like a demo. But it was just so expensive on Amazon. So I was like, how can I demonstrate how this works without buying one of these? And so I filmed Dripstick removing the cream from a Twinkie with like an iPhone, and apparently people were into that because
that's great.
There's some nostalgia with it, but they understood the product immediately based on that. Like, so we still use Twinkies to this day. So sometimes we get snarky comments online. They're like, why is this company obsessed with Twinkies? Well, it's because anatomical clear vaginal canals are very expensive.
It probably would be banned on social media too in some sort of way.
Yeah, that's true, because it's too direct.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
Have you used the Twinkie on TikToks?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, we have.
I feel like it wouldn't be banned on social media. I feel like it...
Or the vaginal, like a clear vaginal canal.
Oh.
Yeah,
probably.
Because it's like, oh, it's a vagina.
Yeah. Sarah Brown, our marketing director, does have one of those from her sex education days. And like, we haven't really used it for Lorals videos, but sometimes it's been in the background. And I don't think we've had those taken down, but you're right. Like, if we used it and
it's
like
front
fingered that would get taken down.
Actually, so it's not the vaginal canal. So I have like 2 vulva like silicone models that I have on my shelf in the room where I like do Zoom meetings and like work and stuff. Hasn't been spotted yet because it's like small enough and like with like a bunch of like other stuff on the shelves. But there is that, like, if you want to use like a dripstick for like a more like anatomical model. And it's like $200 or something. It's not like crazy, at least like in terms of like a business cost.
Oh, or like one of the masturbation sleeves.
Okay, oh my God. Early on, we looked at those. It's so hard to find a good masturbation sleeve that's like the correct, like sort of like, it's anatomical enough, but not like, because like the fleshlights, they often have the signature of the person on the fleshlight.
So unrealistic.
I mean, it's like a pleasure product. So like, I kind of get it, but like, I was like, yeah, because like we were trying to, I forgot why we were looking for like sort of vulva vagina-ish model at some point, but yeah, like we looked at fleshlights. That was, it's also just like it's a sex toy also, and it's kind of depending on who you're trying to show this to, it could be like weird for people. Also, the signature is just kind of not for this. The closest one we found at the time was there was this very like realistic looking. Oh yeah, there was a very realistic looking vulva model, but it had a hand on it that was also like a cast to make it look like it was opening up the vulva a little bit, like kind of spreading it out a little bit. Yeah, still kind of sexy. Yeah, still, but it's like, do you get the hand one or do you get the signature with like a flashlight, sort of canister? And like at least the one with the hand was like $16 on Amazon Prime. So like we got that one. It's the most disgusting thing I've like people were disgusted by it.
Wow.
Which is because like it's just like very floppy, like extremely like very cheap. It's $16. So it's like extremely cheap material. So it just feels weird. It had a weird smell because it's like, kind of factory sort of smell. But like it was the only one I could find that like didn't have the signature on it. And then also it didn't, like a lot of the vulva models that are like, especially like sex toys, look very like fake. Like the vulvas like look very unrealistic and like very like either symmetrical or, there's just something about it. And I'm like, I want something that's like reasonably realistic. So
it's funny because we all kind of want the same thing. And I wonder, like this feels like a market opportunity for someone to make like realistic size, like vulva vaginal models for brands that need to utilize these things in demonstrations. Because it doesn't really exist. Because I'm actually thinking to myself, I actually ordered like a sex doll on Amazon. It was like from like mid thigh up to here. And because I want it to be able to show that like with Lorals, like when they're on somebody's body, like you can be fingering in the front and the back at the same time and you're still being covered up. And when it arrived, it was like child size.
Oh no.
Yeah. And I actually I had looked for the one that had the biggest waist measurements, and so like I thought it was going to be okay, and it had a big butt, but then like this tiny little thing that it did not work, and it was a little sad.
Have you looked at the real dolls, or is that like it's just
I think that's too expensive and too much. Like I don't need that. I just need like this much space.
Human.
Don't need a full human. Yeah.
Maybe custom commission. Like I just want this section.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Interesting. I wonder how the other companies in our space do it. Because we get like backlash for using a Twinkie, but I'm like, do you want us to use a sex doll? Like, I don't know.
Yeah, and I mean,
they want the model.
I would not be able to use that
on
on TikTok or in any of the educational. I mean, and even if we put it on our website, then I would worry about like being flagged with our Google ads and stuff, you know? So I don't know if it would actually be practical to use it. But maybe like a plastic thing that didn't look anatomical, but had like a canal inside, that could be useful.
Hey, if there's anyone who...
Yes. That would be awesome.
Yeah.
Oh my God. How cool.
If we have any nerdy people who make things, write in.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any other sort of like war story prototype stuff, or do we want to move on to like fun patents? FDA, we kind of touched on the FDA clearance a little bit, but if there's anything in terms of after like half the thing,
I mean, it's just a lot of education on the product. Mm-hmm. I feel like for all of us, right? Like, what is it? How does it work? And just like why we created it. Yeah.
So, I guess we've kind of touched on that in a way of like how we've been doing. Or is there like something like, is there something else like in terms of like the hurdles or just or experiences of how you've tried to demonstrate Dripstick on like online or to investors or?
I did find that if I didn't talk about it as it relates to me personally, like if I didn't lead and say like, I have a husband and I have sex and blah, 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 people would be like deeply offended. They would feel like I was saying that they have sex. They probably do. Especially if they have a kid, it's like, okay, you do have sex, but like there was a way that I had to figure out how to talk about this to offend the least number of people in the room. There's typically always someone who's like kind of offended, but like, so it was really interesting that everything had to come from a place of like me, and it was not my intention to be like the cum sponge girl, but that's what ended up happening.
Yeah. So I think, how did you get like, what was kind of the hurdle for you to get to that? Because it is sort of like how you describe like Dripstick. It's like it does come from a vulnerable place of like, I'm experienced too much cum after like I have sex with my husband, so I made this product, and like that's something that would probably take me a few years to like be comfortable talking about something like that, especially
probably
with like
has taken.
It was, okay, so it was actually a comedian that helped me come to this. I don't know if I ever told you this. So that accelerator, Grid 110, there was pitch practice. And so I pitched it at first, like you pitch anything with like statistics, and this is the number of women who are like on birth control, and this is the number of women who are trying to get pregnant. And the reception from the people in the cohort was just like terrible. Like they just either like were completely confused or like laughing at me, not with me. And it wasn't very effective. Yeah. And so there was a guy in the cohort who was an actor, maybe still is an actor. And we were talking about it as it relates to like stand-up comedy routines. And so that's kind of how it evolved. And I mean, in comedy, typically you're talking about yourself. And so I don't have a comedy background, but that's how we met kind of. Osborne. Yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah, because I did that. Oh my God. I forgot about that whole connection. I was doing an improv class, and one of the guys, and I talked about my product at some point, and one of the guys in my class was like, I know somebody who's making something really similar and you guys should know each other. That's
how we met. And it was like years ago, and it was before like the patents and FDA, and for me it was like, I have this idea, what do you think, Melanie, who I don't know at all? And that was the first time we connected and talked. So stand-up comedy has been interwoven throughout everything, but that was so I actually was kind of forced to get to that place immediately because it was a series of 3 pitches, and so I just had to, by the last pitch, it was like, I have a husband. He comes in me. That's what happens.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
It's, because it is difficult to like share share things about that. And then it's like, what are people going to think? It's like, it feels more like open and vulnerable. Like I still have trouble with that. Like I post data of my orgasms online, and I'm like, but it's like line chart data. So I'm kind of like, whatever. But beyond that, I'm like, it's hard to be open about it.
It is a weird thing. But then if you lead with like, oh, how many people are having oral sex? Or like, how many people are getting cum in? Like, not very many people are going to raise their hand.
They're too shy to raise their hands.
Yeah.
I did an accelerator that was like kind of similar, and somebody also came in. She didn't have a comedy background, but she had like a public speaking background. And what we came up with at that point, and I'm not really doing this anymore, but I did really like it at that point, was to start by saying, hi, everyone. Okay, we're about to talk about sex, and not just about sex, but about oral sex. And not just oral sex, but oral sex for the benefit of women and people with vulvas. Are you ready? Okay, here we go. So that was kind of like the icebreaker. And I think that worked kind of well because like it was a little bit shocking and more shocking and more shocking. And then the shock is over and then you just kind of think about the product and stuff. What I'm doing now instead is just being really explicit about what the product is in my like initial email. And then also like leading with our numbers. And they're, thanks to the FDA clearance and also to TikTok, they're strong enough that if somebody is slightly uncomfortable with the nature of the product, then maybe they'll still talk to us because of the numbers. But then like, if they're not comfortable with the nature of the product, then, it's just like, oh, well, I don't know. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then like, sorry for this long pause. I'm just trying to figure out if I want to talk about this. So basically the other thing that I've encountered is like how personal to be with the story about why Lorals was created. And, here and there, I'll have conversations about like, what did you think of this interaction? Like, would you change it? Blah, blah, blah. And so like I've been told in my pitch to not talk about oral sex, which is just not workable.
Yeah.
I, at one point, was talking about how I created Lorals because I had an STI and I wanted to protect my partner. And we just didn't think that dental dams were a good option. But I've been told that talking about having an STI and creating the product for that purpose, people are going to be put off because like they'll think you're like dirty, basically. And that is insane. And I'm just not willing to listen to that advice because like 800 million people worldwide have STIs that can be transmitted via oral sex. The majority of the US population has cold sores, which are oral herpes, which are an STI. And so we just have to remove the stigma that is associated with having an STI and with talking about it, either with your partner or publicly. But like, it drives me crazy that that's the feedback that I get. I also get the feedback, okay, so maybe it's okay that you talk about, having an STI on your honeymoon and that's why you thought of the idea for Lorals, but I wouldn't bring up that you were married to a woman, because then people will think that this is just a lesbian product. And what do you do? On one hand, you want to personalize it. And then on the other hand, every way that you personalize it makes it feel more and more niche. So
I wonder what the group is, like the overlap of like people who people who would be uncomfortable with like oral sex, STIs, and you being married to a woman versus like people who are like, hey, if there's a market, this looks good. I feel like that the cluster, the circles would be reasonably close, in terms of the overlap of just like people who would not be interested in general, versus the people who would be interested.
Right. And actually I was thinking recently about how your method of fundraising, when you just emailed a ton of people and you did cold emails rather than like trying for the warm intros.
I did try the warm intros,
yeah.
But those didn't go well.
Like, people don't feel very comfortable doing a warm intro for a sex tech company if they're not already in the sex tech space. So the intros, like, they're warm, but they're like kind of tepid, because like there's still just a lot of stigma. Yeah. And so I was realizing, I think that the method that you did long ago was really, really smart because it's basically just about getting the idea into as many people's hands as possible and, sharing what you've been able to do. And, people obviously see that there is a ton of potential and also existing success there. The person who I was recently having this conversation with also was like, don't mention Tourette's. And so also like, it's kind of weird for me right now because I've never, since my wedding, I don't think I've been on camera ticking. So this is going to be interesting, and I'm ticking a lot. And I'm ticking a lot because I'm comfortable with you guys. Like if I weren't comfortable, I probably wouldn't be ticking. But anyway, so that's kind of why I'm being a little bit neurotic. Apologies. Sorry.
Oh, no, it's fine.
Okay.
Like,
I think you're really good.
Thanks.
Yeah.
No. I just mean in the last 10 minutes. I'm sorry.
No, I mean, I think it's like, I don't know, like, what are they going to say? Like, okay, this is off topic type, but like, what are, it's like, what's their advice? Like,
Yeah,
just
who's
don't
asking you
mention
to
it,
like sterilize yourself?
Yeah,
100%. Like,
fuck them. Like, who, yeah, it's like, that's not reasonable. Like, yeah, okay, sure, in a perfect world, like, you wouldn't have the ticks, but like, we're not living in a fucking perfect world.
Mm-hmm.
And like, they need to, like,
I would have the ticks in a perfect world, actually, because
okay.
I think the reason that Tourette sometimes comes up when I'm talking with investors or like potential partners or whatever is because actually having it is what helped me make the decision to leave my law job and to start Lorals. So basically, like I was in this, stable law career and I had the idea for Lorals and I thought it was really a cool idea, but I knew it was a stigmatized space. I knew that my family would be uncomfortable with it. I knew that if I decided to do that, I was leaving something that like I knew that I was good at and I had a pathway to like success. And then I would be leaving that for like a huge question mark. And so, there were just so many questions in my mind, like, am I going to do this, like, or not? But meanwhile, I was like sitting at my desk and like trying to write legal briefs, and my Tourette's just got worse and worse over the course of like the 8 months that I had thought about Lorals, to the point that I quit. And it got to the point that I would be like sitting at my computer and I would just like tick at my computer all day. And it was to me that my body was basically like yelling at me to go for it and to do this.
That's a good stress signal.
It was such a good stress signal. I knew that like I could not do this job anymore and I needed to do this thing that was like this dream in the back of my mind. And so I'm really, really glad that I had that stress signal that I don't think I would have had the courage or the knowledge that I wanted to do it so much, except for like that physical manifestation of what I was thinking in my mind.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause my physical manifestations would be like, I feel extremely sick and like tired and really depressed.
Just like founder manifestations that you work through and you don't address.
Yeah. And it's like, that's something that like creeps up like after like a year or a few years. And it's like, and then and it's there, but you don't notice until years. But I guess kind of going back around to where I was talking about, it was like, I think I interpreted what you were saying as like the investors or whoever's giving advice is like, just don't have Tourette's, because then I don't know what, like maybe, I don't know if they like, or I don't know, like, are they saying it from like people are put off by you having tics when you're having conversations, or where is it?
I think people are like worried that it could become a problem for a CEO down the line, which is so ridiculous. Like, it's just something that some people have, and people get over it very quickly. Like people that are around me or anybody who's around somebody with Tourette's. So,
all right, so we all have to go. We all have stuff to do. Where do we find both of you?
Well, Lorals are available at mylorals.com. That's mylorals.com. We're also on TikTok at mylorals and all of the socials. You can also buy us at urbanoutfitters.com or at a variety of shops across the United States and the world.
And so you can buy dripsticks at Awkward Essentials. We're at awkwardessentials.com. Email us anytime. Me or our general email, hey@awkwardessentials.com. And we're on all the socials as well at Awkward Essentials.
Awesome. Well, Okay, we have to go and do things, so
Yay.
we'll see you all later.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, leave a like or a rating. And if you want to hear more episodes like this, hit that subscribe button. We publish these bi-weekly on every second and fourth Sunday. Until next time, stay curious.